In 2013, several partners, including the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, the Pennsylvania Grazing Lands Coalition, USDA's Agricultural Research Service, and USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, utilized grant funding through Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program to collaborate with Dickinson College Farm in Boiling Springs, PA, and Wyebrook Farm in Honeybrook, PA, and began a multi-year project to investigate and apply adaptive management for silvopasture establishment in both woody and open pasture environments. 3 years have passed and the project is complete. Here are some of the changes, issues, and successes experienced by these farmers.
At Wyebrook Farm, we have seen positive changes occurring. Once we opened up the canopy, we are starting to see some of what we may consider the native grasses coming in. We're seeing some of the native forbs. So as far as the plant communities, we are seeing that positive change. Through the work at Wyebrook Farm, individuals can see how they've taken a mature woodlot, have thinned out the overstory, and have done some major improvements as far as brush removal, introducing goats and cattle, and just allowing them to see the overall process. There were several things done at Wyebrook that probably wouldn't be done on normal sites. Dean, when he cut the overstory out, he did whole tree harvest, so there was very little slash and undesirable wood product left behind, which left him with a very clean slate to work from as far as getting seeding done. Many other producers, if they have a tree harvest, they may have to be dealing with slash and other wood product that may not have saleable values. Dean had also, prior to our project beginning, had planted some honey locust trees, large caliper trees out in the open pasture. And at this point, looking at all the guidance on establishing silvopasture, we felt that maybe more trees would need to be established. He had a grid system going. We had talked about planting more trees to either make a grid type system or a cluster type system, which would definitely add to our canopy cover to try to achieve that 30% and also give him that secondary tree crop in addition to the pasture. One of the other physical challenges that we saw was formation or reformation of wetlands. So you take a wooded site that has a lot of high density stand of trees, those take up a lot of water. So once we cut the trees out, those what we call pumps are now shut off. So now that water is now more apparent, more plentiful in the area. So we now have wetland areas to deal with, especially once we start introducing the grazing animals.
So overall, I think the project went really well. I would say it was successful for us on our farm. Some of the high points for us was the ability to work with experts in different fields to help us make decisions that would impact our project in a positive way. So working with folks from the Bureau of Forestry, from NRCS, from soil conservation to vegetation, grazing specialists. That was really helpful to us to see our pasture from a perspective that we don't always see it from, and working with people who could advise us in beneficial ways. There's definitely challenges that we've had over the past 3 years, but they're not challenges that I would think deterred us in any way or would change our decision to do this if we had to do it over again. We're just learning as we go. And I think that the full impact of the project will be seen in future years, and so we're just at the beginning step of it, or the beginning stage of it, and so we're excited to see its impact in the future, and we have good feelings in thinking that there'll be positive impacts.
With this project, when we initially started, we had probably 11 more trees in here. We had no tops, no organic matter whatsoever. You actually seen the rock ledges. There was no grass. It was mostly chickweed, multiflora rose, it's come a long way over time. And then, like I said, then when they took a bunch of the trees out, that really opened up the canopy, which probably allowed for more undesirables to come in, but it also allowed those desirable forages to come up. So there's been quite a bit of change over the last 3 years.
Aside from the seeding and invasive weed issues that we experience in the woodlot, I think that the process of doing an assessment of the tree species in the woodlot and removing tree species of the woodlot that were unfavorable species helped to open that space for grazing in a good way. We're still waiting to see what the impact of our seeding mix has been. That's been slow to establish itself. But what the woodlot has afforded us over the summer months is a place to bring or to allow our cows access to for cooling off, and that has been an added benefit that we hadn't had prior. And they're also, in doing that, helping us with invasive species management. We did do some herbicide control of some of the aggressive ones, but allowing our livestock in to that area during the hot days cools them off, but also is helping us kind of mitigate reoccurrence of invasive species. So I worked with Tracy Coulter with the Bureau of Forestry to kind of create a map and design and plan for the trees that we ended up planting in our open pasture area. And based on our goals for the farm and obviously the goals of this project, we came up with guidelines that kind of helped us with our selection process of tree species. And so obviously one of the first parameters that we held the plan to was that the trees had to have enough filtered light so that they wouldn't kill the pasture underneath. So that was a necessity, obviously, for the success of a silvopasture project. But other parameters that we used was that we also wanted trees that would bloom at different times of the spring to support our pollinators on the farm. We do raise honeybees, but aside from just honeybee production, we also want to support pollinators. So we selected trees like locust that bloom early and are a good supply of pollen. We also selected tree species that are native to Pennsylvania. That was also very important to our farm and the philosophies behind our farm. And then lastly, we selected species that are known, some of which produce food. So we have some pears and some apple tree varieties, again, just to bring diversity for pollinators, but also tree height, tree width, and then food for both our livestock or the people who work on our farm.
So for a long while, we've been looking for a way to add shade to our pastures and give our livestock a break, as well as diversify the landscape. When we started this operation, right away we began planting trees in various spots around the farm, and so silvopasture was a natural fit for us. And our livestock, they tend to appreciate the shade, and a little bit of a weather break is the long-range goal, as well as some extra forage in the pasture. So we've definitely seen progress towards that goal, and it's very exciting to see the trees grow and learn how to manage the livestock around the trees so that we get both pasture improvement and healthy trees and welfare for our animals. In our field pastures, we alternate between grazing the sheep and the cattle. Sometimes we actually mix them together depending on conditions, and then oftentimes the pastured poultry will follow behind the other livestock to try to clean up some of the parasites. I will say that at the beginning of the project, we started by protecting our trees with just a poly wire, a hot wire around the trees, and that was effective for keeping the beef cattle out. But we had a couple of experiences where sheep escaped their enclosure, got into the unprotected tree area, and were able to kill a couple of saplings overnight. So what we've learned is that, if that's a concern for you, that having some sort of more permanent fencing around the saplings is important. So once we did that, the sheep have been pretty good about staying out of the trees, and it's more a matter of the heavy cattle pushing up against the fences and having to figure out a way to prevent that. So barbed wire has been helpful in that aspect as well.
With regard to enclosing the trees and protecting them from the livestock, we've troubleshot a lot over the past 3 years with successes and failures. And so I would say that we're still kind of working out those logistics, but currently we have tree cages, individual tree cages around each tree, of which we have just under 80 trees on our farm through this project. And so each tree is caged by wire gauged fencing, cattle fencing, and they're supported by T-posts. And then a new addition to that system is barbed wire to kind of train the livestock that they will have a negative impact or a negative outcome of nosing up to the fence. Those still aren't the golden egg solutions, and so we have new ideas that we want to keep implementing. Again, just troubleshooting so that if we do come up with a solution and other farmers want to implement this on their farm, we can kind of share what worked for us, having gone through this process through grants funding support.
If we were to go back to the beginning of the project, I think the one thing we've learned is that being thorough and vigilant with the way we protect the trees from livestock is just vital. Because it takes so long to establish trees, it's a labor expense, it's a monetary expense if you're buying saplings, that what we've learned is that livestock can kill expensive trees in a matter of hours. It really doesn't take that long for the sheep gnawing on the bark, or livestock, cattle just pushing into the tree saplings. Can really be murder literally on a tree and do a lot of damage in a short amount of time. So that's been a little bit of frustration. Is we lost a couple of really nice trees through just one or two afternoons of lapse attention. We've been developing over time a system of protecting the trees from the animals, and that's really been an important learning experience. But it's also been probably the major headache of the project is, we're used to grazing animals in open pasture. Now we're trying to adapt them to a system where we have tender young perennials that we want to protect. So in the long run, it's going to be great when those trees can withstand a little bit of animal impact. But right now we have this interim period where it is a little bit of a challenge.
And what's realistic for people that are used to growing vegetables or used to renovating pastures and seeing a new pasture sward come in after they've limed and fertilized and all that kind of stuff. Those types of rate of change, those 1 to 3 year sort of success periods are maybe a little unrealistic when you're talking about changing forest types or introducing trees into a new pasture. Anytime you start working with trees, you gotta just really good cattle people will talk about only managing your livestock on cow time. You don't set your clock. You start going into cow time if you have to sort cattle or load cattle. And I'll tell you that tree time is a lot slower than cow time. So you got to even take it down a notch or two in terms of what your rate of change expectations are, or you're going to be bumping up against some fixed issues, behavioral issues with trees that you're not going to resolve within the time frame that you think you want to resolve them in. And that's just the reality. And so, you got to pile a lot of tree time on top of your cow time. And if you're willing to do that, you're probably going to be a good silvopastoralist.
3 years is hardly long enough to fully understand how cow time and tree time will impact the adaptive management techniques used on these farms. Here are a few recommendations that Wyebrook and Dickinson College Farm can implement for ongoing development of their silvopasture systems.
In the next 4 to 5 years, I expect to see improvement of the silvopasture out at Wyebrook. We've talked about adding goats to the system to keep the woody and brushy material under control, which is going to allow the grass to be established, to come in. If we are managing the grazing properly, maybe using some co-grazing between cattle and goats, we're going to be able to control that overstory and the undesirable vegetation. Other practices that we've talked about for seeding would to actually be allowing the cattle or goats to be in the silvopasture during the wintertime and feeding hay on the ground. This is going to provide several benefits. One, it's going to allow some natural reseeding from whatever seed is in the chaff of the hay. And also we're going to be able to get some minor mulching from that hay, which is going to help retain moisture, hopefully maybe keep the soil temperatures so we can get some better seed establishment and germination. Additional management practices that we would use in the silvopasture would be adding a watering system. We've talked about adding above ground pipeline from the existing solar watering system that Dean has on the farm. There are streams running through the 34-acre silvopasture, so that would allow us to make some paddocks to increase the intensity of the grazing within the silvopasture. So obviously once we increase paddocks, we're going to need to get water to those paddocks. The interior fencing, because it's a young establishment, we're trying to keep our invasives and species out of the silvopasture, so using an intensive grazing management system is going to help us do that.
I think as far as this woodlot goes, I expect to see it become more forage based opposed to like more of a diversity of forbs and stuff. Out in the pasture fields that they planted the trees, I look for them to probably put in more shrubs and kind of have more of a diversity within those tree line areas, because some are in clumps and some are in actual rows. Right now they're watering in one central location. It would be nice if they were moving the water. I think they wouldn't have as much mud issues if they were actually moving the water, and they could easily do it because they're just using a hose. Or if they were going to keep a permanent water, that they put some stabilization around it, some stone to keep that from getting mud. But I think the key is limiting the time they're on here, managing the forages accordingly, and using division fence to help break it up so we don't overgraze it or undergraze it, depending on what the final goal is for forage production.
One thing I would recommend people consider is what tree species grow well on your property already. You know, here at our farm we have a lot of honey locust and black locust, mulberry, walnut. Those are tree species that are kind of almost weedy on the property already. And if money is a limitation, which it is for a lot of growers, starting with something that is readily available and grows fast on the property is something also to consider. Farmers should also remember that when you're going to a silvopasture system in an open pasture, that it might complicate your haymaking operations, or if you do any kind of annual clipping. So it's a little bit more complicated if you're going to get in there with equipment and do any kind of pasture maintenance. But hopefully in the long run, the trees are helping to actually improve the pasture.
One of the main considerations for a producer considering to begin a silvopasture system is to assess the quality of their woodlot. Many times silvopasture seems like a great idea as a way to expand pasture, but we also have to take in consideration what the quality of the existing forest is. So I would suggest before hiring a contractor to come in and cut trees down, I would contact a local forestry rep from DCNR or a private forester to come in and do a stand evaluation. Because if you have a high quality forest presently, it may not need to be used as a silvopasture, and you may be able to manage that to protect the high quality forest that you have. On the other hand, a forester may come in and find that your forest could be improved, and silvopasture can be one of those practices where you could come in, clear out the overstory, take out the undesirable trees, manage it for pasture for several years, 10, 15, 20 years, and then actually go back in and replant trees or allow for natural regeneration and put that area back to a high quality forest.
It takes a lot of, like I mentioned before, a lot of theoretical knowledge about both the disciplines involved to establish and maintain a silvopasture and to really achieve the objectives that you want from it, that you need to know that you have those skill sets under your belt or have someone that really knows what they're talking about and can help assist you specifically in the context of doing a silvopasture. We have a lot of great grazers that, and we heard Matt talk about people that didn't like him putting trees in his pasture because from a grazing perspective that was giving up productivity, and not all grazers have been privy to the research in silvopasture that actually shows that at a certain level of shade, you actually increase forage productivity. So you have to be careful what you hear from either discipline, either forestry or the grazing side of things, because most of them are not really paying attention to the silvopasture research and the learning opportunities that are out there. So I just think it's the kind of thing that if people, the faster people rush into it, probably the more likely they are going to have some regrets about how they go about doing it. And then other than that, I'd say come out and talk to people like Matt, and talk to the people, Susan Perry and Tracy Coulter, and get connected to the network. There's a lot of very, I mean, there's not a lot, but there are some people that are really valuable resources here in Pennsylvania.
Additional grazing resources, including technical guidance developed as part of this project, are available through the Pennsylvania Grazing Lands Coalition website, paglc.org.